The next time somebody tries to tell you a narrative that the crackdown on civil liberty started after the 9/11 attacks, don't buy it. It started well before that, and one of the first targets in your lifetimes was the environmental movement. And we can say, for instance, what were the impacts on the rights of black Americans by the attacks on the black nationalist movement and the movement for black power? Right? You can see downstream impacts in the settings of those movements. The same is true with respect to the environmental movement. Right? Climate change is at the center of the public discussion now. It was being forced onto the public agenda 20 years ago by a set of people who are now either in jail or on the international lam. How different would our public policy be if speech were actually free instead of criminalized? Since 9/11, certainly Muslims have been in the crosshairs. Peace and justice activists not far from here in Maryland, state police were caught spying on activists who were on both sides of the death penalty, both sides of reproductive rights. And the point I want to draw out here is that government surveillance is an equal opportunity abuse. You don't necessarily have to have a particular political perspective. You just have to have a political perspective. If you have any political perspective that is outside the dominant institutions, you are a target for government surveillance, disruption, and what the FBI called in its campaign to neutralize, I just gave it away, neutralization. That was the word that the FBI used when targeting civil rights and other leaders. All right, so I want to fast forward. After 9/11, we talked about the origins of the NSA's program. I want to jump ahead to 2008, which was a critical year for a few reasons. So, first, the Bush administration is stepping out of office. The Obama administration is coming in. There was a question at the time about which way would Washington break. Barack Obama campaigned for the White House largely on a platform of restoring what he described as a balance between liberty and security, which were not opposed principles, reversing the Bush legacy, only then, unfortunately, to entrench it. I'm going to tell you a quick story from July 2008, which I find very illustrative in the context of the current debate surrounding NSA spying. So 2008, the FISA. Remember 5 minutes ago we were talking about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act passed in the 1970s by Congress to stop domestic spying. In 2008, proposed amendments to FISA are introduced to essentially permit everything that the original statute was passed to prohibit. Then Senator Barack Obama pledges to filibuster the law, not only to oppose the proposed amendments, but also to filibuster them, right, to go to the mat opposing them, only to ultimately sign them. In July 2008, the largest affinity group on myBarackObama.com was a group that called itself Get FISA Right, which the president did not. And in July 2008, 4 months before the presidential election, he wrote a letter to the group, Get FISA Right, on his site, saying that the reason I signed this law was so that I could curtail these programs as a president, which, of course, he's not done. To his credit, a few weeks ago, he did announce what I would describe as a meager, under-inclusive, and within itself not particularly objectionable, but in a broader context, counterproductive reform of requiring the NSA to secure judicial orders from the secret FISA court before permitting the query of the NSA's database. And permit me the brief indulgence. There are law students in the room, yes? Are there any law students in the room? Raise your hand if you go to school here. Okay, some. All right, so I want to give you just a quick, 3-minute intro to legal realism because it will matter for you. You will hear a lot of contrived formalisms to distinguish things in the law that are otherwise alike. And, for instance, you can see this demonstrated in essentially different rules applied to like situations. Law is described as the application of consistent principles across differing facts, right? But when the facts change and the rules change, you should smell that something is up. And so here's an example. When we talk, for instance, about free speech, right? People will often talk in the contemporary context about the Citizens United case regarding free speech for corporations, and they might talk about the rights that corporations have that people also have. Don't forget that corporations have more rights than you do. And I want to demonstrate in a different context this particular double standard in the rule of law. Najee spoke in his introduction about the United States claiming to be an exemplar of human rights around the world, and I'm going to broaden the context beyond surveillance and then link that back to these distinctions among seemingly similar situations. It's this administration that has asserted the right to kill people without trial through robotic remote assassination. And there's a lot of debate about the intelligence of that as a national security matter in any of the particular theaters where we deploy drones. Think about drones as the evolution of a new kind of warfare like chemical weapons and nuclear weapons that is itself a human rights abuse. right? And think about the role our nation has had in normalizing that. And think about what grounds we might have to try to stop China from using drones in Tibet. Would we have any conceivable ground to resist that? And just to note what we're talking about with drones, we are talking about secret decisions made within an executive branch enabling the assassination of U.S. citizens without trial. What could be more antithetical to the Constitution on which our nation was founded than that? The usurpation of the powers of the judge, jury, and executioner to the executive branch, right? We also have well-established authorities for military detention without trial, not just at Guantanamo Bay, but since December 31st, 2011, here within the United States. Look up the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 in sections 1021E, C through E. There is a statute on the books. To President Obama's credit, he has pledged not to use them in a signing statement he issued when signing this law. It gives the military to detain any of you indefinitely without trial. It's a standing order that could be used for essentially the same kind of roundups to which 100,000 Japanese Americans were subjected in World War II. That Supreme Court case upholding the detention is, of course, still what we in law would call good law, in the sense that it remains standing. And so, again, when people think about the potential politicization of tools like the NSA, think about how bad it can get. I'm not done yet. It actually gets worse than that. Torture was committed by our country, right, as an instrument of intense interrogation. It continues at Guantanamo Bay, particularly through the forced feeding regime. It continues pervasively across the country in U.S. prisons through the manifestation of prolonged solitary isolation. You've heard about it here before, earlier in this panel. Solitary isolation is categorically a human rights abuse. It is an instrument to deny people of their sanity. It breaks people's humanity. And it is endorsed widely by our country, at the same time that we claim to be a leader of the free world. In the face of documented torture, and I want to, so many directions in which to go, I'll just confine this to two and then try to connect this back. The Senate Intelligence Committee today has a 6,000-page report about torture committed under the Bush administration, vastly beyond the abuses we heard about at Abu Ghraib and Bagram Air Force Base. It documents, reportedly, abuses as severe as outright rape of detainees. There are videos, there are photos. They were ordered disclosed by multiple federal judges in 2009 before Congress, at the same time that it was fighting tooth and nail to stop health care reform from proceeding, united across parties in October 2009 to amend the Freedom of Information Act specifically with one reason: to give the Defense Department the authority to hide evidence of its criminal trail that multiple courts had ordered released over the Obama administration's objections. So this report, the Senate Intelligence Committee's report, is 6,000 pages long. It's classified. No one's ever seen it. When Zero Dark 30 comes into the theaters and people start wondering, does torture work? The Senate Intel Committee knows it doesn't work. The Senate Intel Committee knows how bad torture was. None of us do, because it's all still secret. There is a vote in the Senate Intel Committee this spring about whether to declassify the report. I'd invite you to check it out and raise your voices about it. The last thing I want to say about torture before I connect this quickly back is that many people complicit in torture continue to serve in very prestigious government positions. There is a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, one layer down from the Supreme Court, who has a lifetime, $250,000 taxpayer-funded salary. He cannot travel abroad for fear of being detained, rightfully so, as a war criminal. His name's Judge Jay Bybee, and he was the head of the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department under the Bush administration. There are others who, for instance, teach law at public universities around the country. It is a travesty in plain sight. And against that, here's coming back to legal realism and the contrast among different rules. There are 2.5 million Americans in prison today for offenses that should not be criminal in the first place in a large number of their instances, while people guilty of our species' most fundamental commitments continue to draw taxpayer-funded paychecks to decide how the law applies to the rest of us. And I would just ask you, as we finish our panel, whether or not the corruption word fits. I'm running out of time, but I want to just note that I do have a range of action opportunities available to each of you, organizationally, individually. If you are at all motivated by this panel to do something about it, please come talk to me, because I'm looking for you. I look forward to your questions and comments.